Hello everyone, welcome to another interesting and informative session of the Analyst brought to you by Vajiram and Ravi. In today's session, we will discuss 7 important articles as featured in the Hindu and Indian Express for your comprehensive understanding of the current affairs explained to you in the easiest language possible. The topics are as follows. From your analysis section, in the first topic, we are going to understand what do we mean by the status of most favored nation which was recently suspended for our country by Switzerland. Then in the second topic, we are going to examine that what is going to be the implications of the change in the government in the US on the geopolitics of South Asia and particularly on our country India. Then from your simplified section, we'll be taking up 5 news. We will not only try to simplify the news for you, but also provide the much important value addition and practice questions keeping in mind the approaching prelims 2025. So stay tuned. Switzerland has suspended India's most favored nation status in the light of the recent verdict of the Supreme Court, which can actually have a significant impact on our foreign investments. How? That is something which we are going to learn further in the session, and this forms an important component of your GS2 paper under the larger theme of important treaties and agreements which our country has signed with important international institutions. So let's first start from the understanding the very basics, and that is what do we mean by the most favored nation concept. Well, it is a kind of a status which is actually accorded by one nation to another in the sphere of the international trade. So let's say, for example, there is a country A named India, and this country A is actually having a kind of a strained relationship with another country B. Let's say that country is Maldives. What is the reason? The reason is that, let's say hypothetically, this country is having a kind of a much more close alignment with another nation, and that is China. So now, as a future diplomat, you give a suggestion that to actually reboost our relation with Maldives, we should actually provide a kind of a most favored nation status to Maldives, under which we are actually going to provide several trade concessions to Maldives. What kind of trade concessions? So let's say, for example, we say that from now onwards, the import duty which we're charging on the products which we are importing from Maldives, we are actually going to reduce down this import duty. So what will happen? The products which you are importing from Maldives, they will actually become cheaper. The products become cheaper, their demands will rise. So if their demand is rising, what will happen? It will actually give a kind of a more boost to the exporters of the Maldives to further produce the product. That will actually create a kind of a chain of the economic improvement in the Maldives. So basically, with this MFN status, we are actually kind of providing a trade concession, or let's say, for example, reduction in the import duty to Maldives. But the most favored nation principle actually lies upon non-discriminatory trade practices. So the idea suggests that if India is actually giving MFN status to Maldives, let's say reducing down the import duty, it has to do the very same for all member states of World Trade Organization, so that no discrimination in the trade can take place between any nation. So if you are giving a special concession to any trading partner, that concession has to be given to all the other members of WTO as well. Thus, the idea is that with this process, we should not create a kind of a trade imbalance. So let's say, for example, if you are giving trade concession to Maldives and we were not doing the very same for Bangladesh, so the Bangladesh product will remain costlier in comparison to Maldives product. So obviously the demand for the Bangladesh product would have dried up. So to prevent that, the MFN status is actually accorded equally to all other nations. When we have understood this, let's try to dwell into the history of this MFN status, the idea of which actually originated from the General Agreement on Tariff and Trade, which came into force in the year of 1948 after the huge trade distortion which had taken place because of the after effect of World War II. So from there, 9 rounds of negotiations have taken place till now under the theme of General Agreement of Tariff and Trade. The first one actually took place in Geneva. The last one was actually the Doha round, which has been in the continuity since the year of 2001. However, the function of this General Agreement on Tariff and Trade was actually kind of overtaken or supplemented by the creation of World Trade Organization through an agreement called as Marrakesh Agreement 1995. Marrakesh is basically a city in the country of Morocco. So the idea of World Trade Organization is what? It acts as an international institution to facilitate and regulate trade in what? In goods, in services, in various kind of intellectual property, such as, for example, trademarks, copyrights, patents, etc. and it facilitates all of this in the member nation countries, which are 166. 162 of them are basically United Nations members. Then there are member countries of European Union. Then there are 3 other countries, such as for example Taiwan, Hong Kong, Macau is there. The whole aim of this World Trade Organization is to actually eliminate or reduce down the various kind of tariffs and trade quotas which exist, to actually ensure free trade which shall take place among the nation without creating any kind of trade imbalance. So, is there any kind of legal framework which exists for MFN? Yes, absolutely. The Article 1 of the General Agreement of Tariff and Trade itself provided that the countries shall give most favored nation status to each other. Then the Article 2 actually extended this to trade in services, and Article 4 actually extended this to various kind of intellectual property rights. What are the benefits which were actually envisaged by giving this most favored nation status? So the idea is, first, it will actually lower down the tariff. What do we mean by tariff? It is basically the kind of fees which we charge on various kind of import and export. So obviously, if you are, let's say, charging less fees on import, the product's cost will become cheaper, and thus the demand will rise, and obviously it will give a kind of an impetus to the exporting industry of other nation. Second is high import quotas. So don't get confused here. Import quotas is basically the limit of the products which we are importing from any country. So if we are increasing the import quota, it is basically means that now we are procuring much more goods from a particular nation, let's say Maldives. So now we are allowing more products from Maldives to actually enter into our economy at a very substantial rate. Third is there can take place signing of various kind of free trade agreements. For example, recently we have signed FTAs with United Arab Emirates or Australia. Also, it can lead to the formation of custom union, which basically act as a kind of a free trade zones. Now the question arises that through this Uruguay round which was taking place under the various negotiations which we are talking about, there were various tariff bounds which took place. So for example, among the developed countries, around 99 tariff bounds took place, right? In comparison to, let's say, for example, we are going to reduce the tax rates for this particular product, or various kind of concessions which were provided. Similarly, 73 tariff bounds were provided to developing nations, and to the transition economies it was further increased to 98. Now, is there exist any kind of exemption from this MFN status? The answer is absolutely yes, because obviously we cannot violate the sovereignty of a nation. So a nation is obviously free to sign any kind of bilateral treaty, and that bilateral treaty can actually put certain provisions of MFN on the side. Second, the developed nations. So the developed nations has actually kind of power to provide preferential access or preferential treatment to the developing nations. So for example, the generalized system of preferences which was provided by the US to our country. Then there are certain countries which are non-WTO members, such as for example, there is Belarus, Iran, North Korea, or for example, Syria recently in the news. So all these countries are non-WTO members, so they do not form the part of this MFN status. So the WTO countries can actually put a lot of trade concessions on these particular countries, a lot of trade sanctions as well. So when we have understood this, now let's move to the what are the advantages which are offered by this MFN status. The idea is that first of all, it is obviously going to enhance what? The spirit of free trade. And how it is going to do so? By removing any kind of trade diversion, and for that we are going to take an example of the case study of Bangladesh textile. So now what is happening that Bangladesh, because of its cheap labor, is actually producing a lot of cheap textile product in comparison to our country. So because of that, what is happening? Let's say for example, there is a lot of trade which is taking place between US and Bangladesh. So what US does, US says that okay, now we are going to actually reduce down the import duty on the Bangladesh textile. So obviously that kind of outflow from Bangladesh will further increase to US, and that will, the products of Bangladesh will start flooding the market of United States of America. But is it going to act as a detriment to our country? Yes, absolutely. But under the MFN status, if the USA is reducing down the import duty for Bangladesh textile, it will have to do the very same for Indian textile as well, thus providing a kind of an equal competitive platform. So thus it is going to enhance the spirit of free trade. Then it also provides kind of equal treatment for disadvantaged nations. Let's say for example the small nations which have low manufacturing capacity or low technologically advancement. So they can also actually kind of participate with larger trade blocs. Then it actually leads to simplification of trade laws, because there can exist a lot of complex bilateral treaties where two countries can actually get to one platform and provide certain provisions and kind of trade agreements which can actually hamper the trade with other countries. So to actually prevent that, it leads to simplification of trade laws, because under this MFN status all countries forms the bracket of one trade agreement only. Then it actually leads to kind of expansion of market access, obviously, and that has a lot of economic and diplomatic cooperation which can actually hamper or which can actually kind of develop from one nation to another. Then there is also promotion of fair competition, and that ultimately will lead to what? Fostering innovation and growth. Let's try to understand this with the context of India and Pakistan. So in the year of 1996, India actually gave MFN status to Pakistan. A question arises here. So let's say for example, if I am giving MFN status to you, are you obliged to give MFN status to me? Absolutely not. That is why Pakistan never reciprocated or never gave MFN status to India. So till 2017-18, we were actually trading with Pakistan on a large scale. For example, our total trade existed at around $2.4 billion. And we had a huge positive balance of trade, with our exports being $1.9 billion and our import was only around $488 million. Where we were actually exporting, let's say for example, cotton, chemicals, vegetables, iron and steel to Pakistan. But this MFN status to Pakistan was actually removed by India after the Pulwama attack of 2019. So what was the impact of that on Pakistan? So a rise in custom duty on the goods obviously will take place on Pakistan. At the same time, the export of materials like cotton and chemicals may stop, which obviously would have raised kind of production costs for industries in Pakistan, obviously leading to the kind of a downfall of economy which it is facing now. So the idea is that there are a lot of advantages which we were offering to Pakistan under this MFN status, but at the same time there also persist several issues as well. First of them is the unilateral interpretation of the MFN clauses, where various countries just try to use this MFN clause for their own benefit on the cost of other countries. The example of that can be seen from the France, Switzerland and Netherlands, which actually started unilaterally applying lower tax rates retroactively when the other new OECD members were joining. So they were actually kind of just diverting the profit to themselves only, and they were not just giving it to the new members. Second was the impact on tax liabilities of the investors. Remember this issue very clearly, because this is going to be the backdrop of understanding India and Switzerland issue which has taken place. So what happened, that the Netherlands investors, they were seeking lower taxes on the dividends from India based upon the MFN clauses. So let's say for example, there exists a kind of a investor from Netherlands, and his major investment has taken place in our country. Now he's a kind of citizen of Netherlands, so obviously he has tax liabilities there as well, and he has tax liabilities in our country as well. Now under the kind of double tax avoidance agreement which the countries signed between each other, it was that to the Netherlands, this particular person A, that person had to pay around 10% tax rate, right? But the Netherlands person who was investing in our country, he is saying that the same tax rate is not uniformly applicable to other residents of other countries. For example, let's say there is another person from Switzerland and you are charging only 5% from him. So why I am paying 10%? Thus, under the MFN clause, they were actually kind of asking to lower down the taxes on dividends. We'll see what happened to that. Third is the issue of tax treaty shopping. So what happens, let's say for example, there is a country A, and let's say there is a person from country A who wants to invest in our country. But if he is going to invest, the tax which we are going to charge from him is, let's say, 25%. But India has signed, let's say for example, with Mauritius a kind of a tax agreement, under which if there is going to be any investment from Mauritius to India, we are only going to charge 10% dividend on any profit. So the tax treaty shopping starts taking place, where this person from country A is actually going to invest in a company B or open a company in Mauritius, and then through the Mauritius he will invest in our country, thus avoiding this 15% tax which he had to pay on the net percentage. This was the kind of tiger industries or the industries in the tiger countries which were actually being controlled by USA, investing in India to gain the tax benefit as we discussed. Then there were a lot of dishonest business practices also started springing up, where the financial aids to native industries and the issue of dumping starts taking place. So for example, let's say if I have to put uniform import duty on the product of all the other countries, I can actually indirectly start providing various kind of benefits to my industries, not directly, through which the product cost actually comes down, and this cheaper product actually start flooding the market of other countries. That is something which actually China is doing. Then comes the opposition by the global north, where they actually highlights a specific problem, that is free rider problem. What is that? So they actually say that the developing nations, let's say for example India, is opting out of various kind of trade barrier reductions, but at the same time they are actually exploiting the benefits under the MFN status. So when we have understood these issues surrounding the MFN, let's try to understand what is the context of today's news. It basically says that the kind of step which can actually hamper the Swiss investments in our country and can lead to higher taxation on Indian companies which are operating in Switzerland from 1st of January 2025. The Switzerland has suspended the most favored nation clause in the double taxation avoidance agreement that India and Switzerland had entered originally in 1994 and amended in 2010. Why it has done so? To understand that, we will have to refer to the Supreme Court ruling, which was actually based upon the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties 1969, where the various companies, the Dutch companies or the companies from Netherlands, they were saying that we are being charged 10% withholding tax under the double tax avoidance agreement. Withholding tax is basically the kind of a TDS which is charged on our income. So for example, let's say even if I am not liable to pay the income tax, the company cuts TDS at the source itself. Then I will have to show them that I am not liable for any taxes. Let's say for example, I have to pay for my rent, I have taken health insurance, etc. So then I will get the compensated amount later, that is income tax return. On the similar basis, there is a withholding tax under the DTA. So if the company is making the dividend, they are being charged on that. What percentage they were being charged? 10%. These Netherlands companies were actually kind of arguing that under the MFN clause, there is lower tax rate which is being offered to other nations. As for example, there is a kind of a uniform 5% tax rate under this DTA with other countries. So why we are paying 10% in our country? The Supreme Court said that the MFN tax provision does not automatically apply to our taxation system because it cannot be enforced unless notified under the Income Tax Act. So the Netherlands companies or the foreign companies from Switzerland will have to keep on paying the 10% withholding tax under the double tax avoidance agreement. Is it going to impact investments in India? Yes, absolutely. Why? Because there is higher withholding tax on dividends in comparison to other countries. So they will shift their business where they have to pay only 5%. Currently, there are 330 Swiss companies which have invested in our country, such as for example, there is your Nestle, there is your Credit Suisse. Then there are 140 Indian companies who have invested in 180 entities in Switzerland, such as for example, major companies like Infosys, Wipro, etc. So if they have removed the MFN clause, obviously the tax concession which they will charge on our companies, that will be removed. So our products will become costlier there. The idea is what? India is actually the 8th largest FDI source for Switzerland, investing more than $3.5 billion actually. 32% of this investment in the emerging technology sectors. Then Switzerland also forms the part of the 4-nation European Free Trade Association, the 4 nations being your Iceland, Norway, Liechtenstein and Switzerland, and these countries were actually going to invest, or they had targeted to invest $100 billion in our country in the next 15 years. So obviously this investment is going to hamper as well. Now just try to connect it with the last discussion which we were having in the Analyst, where we were talking about that how the foreign direct investment in our country is actually reducing in the recent years, and that is going to actually hamper our forex reserves and create a kind of a balance of payment problem. Now, so what are the steps which we shall take? First is obviously to actually create a kind of a rule-based framework under the World Trade Organization, where there shall be a specific clause that how this MFN clause shall work, and the exemptions which are being provided that shall be actually listed down. Then we need to review the various tax treaties which we have with other countries and bring them par with the MFN clause. And the amendment of the Income Tax Act 1961 is required as well, as directed by the Supreme Court. Then we need to actually enforce anti-abuse measures which were actually being taken, for example, France, Switzerland, Netherlands, or various other developing and developed nation. And the preferential treatment which we are providing shall be on the basis of developing nation, which shall be actually defined specifically under the World Trade Organization's agreements. And there shall be further impetus not only on Make in India but also to make for the world, to increase our share in the export share of the world. So remember these suggestions, try to attempt this particular question, and we move forward to the next news of the day. The editorial suggests that with the change in the government in the US, the relations of the US and South Asia is actually going to further improve. The article suggests that with the re-election of Donald Trump as the 47th US president, which is going to become in the month of January 2025, there is actually growing tension among various countries, but not in the region of South Asia, which is actually going to face a kind of a distinct continuity in the policies of the US, being quite central to its Indo-Pacific interest. And this debate forms an important component of your GS2 paper under the larger theme of international relations. The article actually presents India as the leader of the South Asia, and thus in that backdrop, let's try to have a quick overlook at the kind of the close strategic ties which we share with various South Asian neighbors of ours under our neighborhood first policy. So first is that obviously India has spearheaded a lot of multilateral platforms, such as for example there is BIMSTEC, or there is South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, which actually includes your Maldives, Bhutan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, your Pakistan, Afghanistan, India, Nepal, or regional blocks such as for example Bhutan, Bangladesh, India, Nepal regional block, under which a kind of a motor vehicle agreement is also under the procedure. Then if we talk about, let's say for example Nepal, we are the largest trade partner of Nepal with more than $10 billion trade, and we are also the largest source of foreign direct investment for Nepal. When it comes to Bangladesh, the Bangladesh is our largest trading partner in the region of South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, as well as India has played a pivotal role in the liberation war of Bangladesh, which took place in the year of 1971 as well. With Bhutan, we further solidified our relations with it through the Friendship Treaty of 2007, and the support of Bhutan has been a kind of imperative for our country against the Belt and Road Initiative of China. Then when it comes to Sri Lanka, Sri Lanka is our second largest trading partner in the region of South Asia. We have done a lot of major investments, as we were discussing in one of the previous sessions of the Analyst. The major investments such as for example the Trincomalee port, or for example the Jaffna-Colombo rail track which we are creating, or for example the various oil tank farms which has been created by our PSU ONGC there. So as we can see that there are a lot of strategic ties which we share with the region of South Asia. Then if you guys will actually read The Golden Road by William Dalrymple, released recently, it also put impetus upon the historical and the cultural ties and how India has acted as a kind of a harbinger of the socio-cultural growth in this particular region, such as for example being one of the prominent exporter of Buddhism in this particular region. Or for example the cultural diplomacy can also be seen from the Vaccine Matri initiative which we took place, where we supplied free vaccines for COVID pandemic to our neighboring countries. But at the same time, the World Bank actually suggests that when we look at the economic aspect, this region of South Asia is actually a kind of disconnected block where the intra-regional trade is actually lowest in the world. So for example, if you look at the intra-regional trade as a percentage of total trade, it exists around 60% in Europe, 35% in East Asia. But when it comes to South Asia, it is less than 5%, and one of the major reasons for this region being so disconnected when it comes to the terms of trade, the major reason for that is that trading within the South Asia actually costs much more than trading outside the region. For example, it is actually 20% cheaper for our country to trade with Brazil rather than trading with our dear neighbor Pakistan. Obviously because of the kind of the turbulent relations which we share with our dear neighbors Pakistan and China. Then when we talk about India being the leader, the major argument is in the terms of economic aspect. And this is where we actually falter behind our dear neighbor China, which has actually shown significant growth in the term of economy and is doing huge investments in the region. For example, when we talk about India's trade with our neighborhood, it actually ranges between 1.7 and 3.8% of our total global trade. So the idea is that, let's say for example, if I am making a product, instead of just delivering it to my neighborhood, which is obviously much more logistically cheaper for us and can give us much more profit, we are actually exporting more to much farther areas. For example, India's total trade with South Asia, if we talk in the terms of the regional share of global trade, just see it was around $3.75 billion in 2002. Obviously, it started peaking after the LPG reforms which took place in 1991. But even till 2018, we were just kind of stuck on the very same level of the exports which were doing to the region of South Asia. On the other hand, the imports were actually rising significantly. However, with the initiatives of such as, for example, Atmanirbhar Bharat and Make in India, actually our exports have increased recently to $11 billion to around Bangladesh, more than $7 billion to Nepal. So we are making some kind of improvements. But even then, if we compare ourselves with China, we have very less percentage of share in the South Asia in comparison to China. For example, just look at the trade which China has with Pakistan and the trade which we have with Pakistan. Or for example, the trade which China shares with Bangladesh and we have, that is almost like 50% less. Or for example, when it comes to Myanmar, we are trading around $1.75 billion. However, China was trading around $15 billion. So obviously, we are quite kind of faltering behind China in this particular aspect. Then there is a lot of huge investments which China is actually making in the region, leading to its kind of debt trap diplomacy. For example, it provided investments up to $330 million to the region of Afghanistan. When it came to Pakistan, China launched the Belt and Road Initiative, leading to the establishment of China-Pakistan Economic Corridor of around $62 billion. And that has led to the use of China's Gwadar port in the region of Pakistan. And at the end of the corridor, it connects what? It connects it to the Arabian Sea as well as the Persian Gulf. Now it is also being utilized as a naval base for Chinese ships. Then when it comes to Maldives, heavy investments in Maldives. Right? For example, in April 2020, IMF had already predicted that Maldives was at a high risk of debt with China, accounting for 53% of its external debt. And in 2016, a kind of an island was leased by, island of Maldives was actually leased by China for almost 50 years. The same thing it did with Sri Lanka as well. So when Sri Lanka defaulted on $1.51 billion loans for Hambantota port, it was actually taken over by the China for a 99-year lease. Then it is constructing a $13 billion expansion to Sri Lanka's capital with Colombo Port City. When again in 2022, Sri Lanka entered several financial crises. During the crisis, China actually positioned as Sri Lanka's creditor to pressure Sri Lanka to allow a military ship to actually dock at Hambantota port. Same it has been trying in Bhutan as well, where it is building actually 3 villages in the Bhutan sovereign territory. Or for example, in Nepal, a trans-Himalayan corridor of worth $2.75 billion. When in 2022, Nepal was actually trying to ratify a kind of a MCC compact with the United States, China was actually hampering that as well. So this China's maneuvering in the region of South Asia, that is obviously kind of acting detrimental to both India and US interest. And that is why India and United States have enjoyed an upward trajectory in the relationship since the beginning of the millennium, where India was actually accorded or labeled as a net security provider for US in 2009. And with China's further increasing aggressiveness, India and US have strengthened their economic and security cooperation in the region of South Asia, where US actually wants to supplement India's regional leadership to counter China and maintain the value-based order. For example, it has actually supported India on what? On Millennium Challenge Corporation project in Nepal and helping Sri Lanka out of economic crisis. Then there was a kind of a passive relation with the Biden administration share with Pakistan, and withdrawing from Afghanistan also helped India and US to foster a kind of a mutual vision for the region. The reflection of that can be seen from the growing ties in the security as well as the economic aspect. Let's first try to analyze in the security aspect. So we have actually signed when the Donald Trump visited last time in our country in the year of 2020, and he kind of badly pronounced the name of Swami Vivekananda. So at that time, comprehensive global strategic partnership was signed to actually foster cooperation in defense and security. Then to actually revitalize the region of Indo-Pacific, provide a kind of a free and fair trade which shall take place, to actually secure the open lines of communication in the sea. The quadrilateral grouping was formed. The quadrilateral grouping, which actually involves 4 democracies, that is India, US, Japan and Australia. Then US actually came up with Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity, kind of providing a free trade region in the Indo-Pacific, led by 14 countries, including our nation as well. Then we have signed initiative on critical energy technologies, where we are actually developing energy technologies like long artillery rounds, or for example jet and other kind of weapons which can be used for the further defense cooperation. Then we have also launched Defense Industrial Cooperation 2023, where the idea is to actually integrate the artificial intelligence, machine learning to develop the weapons for the future. The same growing ties also reflects in the sphere of the trade as well, where we actually enjoys a trade surplus, where by 2024 India was actually exporting $54.7 billion worth of goods to US and importing only $28.5 billion. So the country actually accounted for 18% of our total export and 6% of our total import. Keep this in mind. But despite this growing connection, there also persist several challenges. As the article itself suggests, the relation between India and US, they are not free of dissonance and divergence. First is obviously the various economic issues. For example, India was actually removed from the generalized system of preferences in 2019. That has led to US actually kind of imposing various kind of anti-dumping and countervailing duties on us. India has also been kept in the priority watch list of USTR 301 report, which basically label India as a country with low IP right protection and high IP theft, intellectual property theft. Then the article suggests that US is actually kind of putting impetus on the de-risking policy of its supply chain, where it is actually providing various kind of tariff protection to its industries and actually providing them with various subsidies and kind of to create a kind of a trade protectionism. They are actually putting a lot of import duty on Indian products, so that can actually hamper the kind of positive balance of trade which we have with US. That can become a challenge in the future. The second is the various security issues which we have. First is obviously the policy blindness toward other issues. So even if you look at the 2+2 dialogues which takes place between India and US, it is majorly putting impetus upon the China's threat, and that too in the Indo-Pacific region. The other issues which exist in the Indo-Pacific, such as for example the rising terrorism or the issue of maritime piracy, that is not of the US concern. Same can be seen with the Euro-American worldview. So for example, US is completely trying to neutralize China's rise as a global superpower. In the quest of that, its viewpoint is very much limited to the interest of the US and its Western European allies. So for example, if there is aggression by China on the line of actual control, or if Pakistan is, let's say for example, building nuclear capacity, which can be quite a strategic challenge for us in the future, these kind of issues are completely out of priority for the US diplomacy. They are completely focusing upon what? Focusing upon the interest which kind of affects them, such as for example putting a lot of sanction on Russia-India trade which was taking place, where we were actually buying oil from Russia when the Russia-Ukraine war was taking place. So that has actually led to a kind of a dichotomy of relation. For example, we actually share positive relations with US and Russia. The China actually shares positive relation with Russia, but with China we do not have that kind of a cordial relation. China does not share the same cordial relation with USA, and so is the case with Russia. So India is actually acting as a kind of a balancing power between these various superpowers, and we also have our interest to actually safeguard. That is why India has actually put impetus upon non-militarization of Quad, focusing upon our strategic autonomy. But US actually wanted what? Militarization of Quad, which shall take place. So the article suggests that what is the change which the 47th US president can bring on the table? That is that it is actually going to be more favorable for India, because the article suggests that the Trump is actually going to put more impetus on anti-China stand. There will be less importance to the human right violation and democracy. Remember, this is a suggestion by the article, the kind of a prediction. and there will be a kind of a convergent stand which India will share with Pakistan. And the coming of Donald Trump will actually be more favorable to the countries like Sri Lanka, Myanmar and Bangladesh, where various kind of, let's say for example, refugee crisis or humanitarian violations which are taking place. Such as for example, US had actually sanctioned the Rapid Action Battalion under the Biden administration and continue to advocate for free and fair election against Sheikh Hasina, clearly diverging from the Delhi's interest. Then the country's criticism and distancing from the US Indo-Pacific strategy of India, despite benefiting from it, is actually like to provoke criticism and pressure from the White House from now onwards. So what can be the ideal way forward? First is to obviously kind of India maneuvering through these various important blocks and remain a balancing force. Because what is the kind of assumptions which G7 has towards SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, that it is having a kind of an anti-G7 stand. India is invited in G7 meetings as well and is an integral member of SCO as well. Then when we are launching G20, we are also raising the voice of the global south as well. At the same time, we have to ensure that the militarization of Quad shall not take place. Why? Because we have to focus upon the strategic autonomy. When, let's say for example, there is only one country which actually shares the land boundary with China and is the member of Quad, and that is India. So in the future event, if there is going to be a kind of a war which will take place, let's say for example, which country is going to be the first point of attack? That is going to be us. So we have to make sure that we remain neutral in the various kind of UNSC resolution and we do not take any sides. Then we need to bolster our defense partnership with other blocs as well, not relying solely on only these two countries of US or Russia. For example, we have recently increased our defense import from the country France. And we need to neutralize any kind of black swan event. So for example, Suhasini Radhar, international relation expert, when she is writing for Hindu, she writes that black swan event can be, for example, further aggression by China on LSE or further sanctions on India-Russia trade by European Union. So in those events, India need to ensure that we remain a kind of a balancing force without taking any sides. So keep these suggestions in your mind, try to solve this particular question, and we move forward to the next news of the day, where we are actually going to read about the first ever report on the drowning prevention which has actually been published by the World Health Organization. The first ever report. The report actually suggests that 3,72,000 people are actually dying from drowning every year. And over 50% of these drowning deaths are among those people who are actually under age of 25 years. The male members are like twice as likely to drown if we compare it to the female. And the drowning is one of the 10 leading causes of death, and that is why it has been accorded the status of a silent killer. 92% of these incidents is taking place in which countries? In the low income countries, disproportionately affecting the poor and the marginalized. If we look at the percentage in Southeast Asia, it actually shares 28% of the global burden. And remember, half of the drowning is under the age of 25 years. The report suggests that the children are at the most case of the risk there. Why so? Because if you look at the largest share of drowning death, that is 24%, those were actually the children less than 5 years of age. 19% deaths were actually of the children between 5 to 14 years, and 14% of death actually occurred for the people between 15 to 29 years. Thus making drowning the third leading cause of the death after tuberculosis and measles for the children under 15 years. Remember that the World Health Organization itself states that this is kind of very unreported or unnumbered data. The reason being that it does not include death by drowning owing to the various natural disasters, such as for example the intensification of cyclones because of the climate change. The question which shall arise in your mind is that why we are taking this drowning as a concept in so much initial phase of our discussion. Is it that important? The idea is that the report itself suggests that if we look at the causes, one of the major cause of these drowning deaths which are taking place, that is because of the impact of climate change. So you guys can actually relate this with the concept of climate change and write a point there as well. So what is happening because of climate change? There is 75% rise in the extreme weather events or in the flooding deaths which are taking place. So for example, there was a town in China, and because of the extreme weather event or a cloud burst which took place there, it actually experienced the rainfall amounting to 1 year's total in one day. So that can obviously lead to what? Kind of hampering the urban infrastructure or the sewage infrastructure which exists. Then in various cities of our country, there already exists poor drainage infrastructure, or we have lack of emergency response forces. Then when we go to the coastal areas, now because of the increasing population which we have, and obviously the very less share of the global area which we have, the land availability which we have, there is a lot of construction which is taking place toward the coastal areas. So obviously, let's say for example, if there is taking place intensification of cyclone or in any future events of tsunami, in all of these events, there can be a mass flooding which can take place. And in our country, what is there? There is poor implementation of the coastal regulation zone. So a lot of construction is taking place toward the coast. Also, the report highlights that how there is lack of awareness and training. So the WHO suggests that the evidence-based drowning prevention interventions are actually being implemented in many countries, but this implementation is of varying degrees. For example, only 33% of the countries are actually offering national programs to train bystanders in the safe rescue. Or for example, only 22% of the countries integrate swimming and water safety training into their school curriculum. Can any one of you tell me if you guys actually had these kind of concepts in your schools? So the idea is what can be done. So the suggestions has been incorporated from the World Health Organization's report itself. It suggests that we need to install barriers controlling access to the water. We shall provide safe places away from the water for preschool children with capable child care. There shall be inculcation of teaching basic swimming, water safety and safe resource skills, including to the school age children. So that can be a suggestion which you guys can also put in if you are writing on the education line, or if you are writing an answer on the new education policy 2020. Then we need to train the bystanders in the safe rescue. Or for example, setting and enforcing safe boating, shipping and ferry regulations, including the wearing of personal flotation devices, and building resilience and managing flood risk and other health hazards as well. Here is a kind of a basic concept which we have included for you guys. So obviously I do not expect you to just start swimming from today itself, but there is a kind of a few steps which you can follow if such situation arrives. I hope to the God never. If you are drowning, then flip over on your back, try to float to keep your head above the water, calm yourself down, conserve your energy. Same concepts can also be applied in your prelims examination as well. And follow the safety courses, such as for example, do not fight the current. If you are too tired to swim, continue floating and try to just signal for the help. So remember these innovative suggestions and we move forward to the next news, where we are actually going to learn about the procedure of impeachment of a High Court judge. Why this actually has been surfaced in the news? Because of the recent controversy which has sprung up, where the judge of Allahabad High Court has actually made a kind of a controversial remark against a particular community, and the opposition has raised this issue in the parliament asking for the impeachment of the High Court judge. On basis of what? So they are basically arguing it on three grounds. The first is that the judge has engaged in the hate speech and incitement to the communal disharmony, which obviously act as a kind of a violation to the constitutional morality. The second is that he has undermined the judicial ethics and the public trust in the judiciary. And he has basically contravened the directive principle which is enshrined in the Article 51 Clause E of the Constitution of India, which actually mandates the promotion of harmony and renouncing any practices which are derogatory to the dignity of the individuals. So this is the controversy. Now we are going to shift our focus towards the grounds and the procedure for the impeachment of a High Court judge. What are the grounds on the basis of which a High Court judge can be impeached? There are two. First is proved misbehavior or the incapacity of the judge. The same two grounds also exist for the impeachment of a Supreme Court judge as well. First, what takes place? First, there will be an address of parliament which will be presented to the president. Who has the power to remove the High Court judge? That power is actually lies with the president, who actually issues the removal order. However, this address of parliament is not just like someone calling upon the president and saying please remove the High Court judge. Rather, this address must be supported by a special majority of each house of the parliament. What do we mean by this special majority? A special majority basically means the majority of the total membership of that house. So let's say, for example, if Lok Sabha has 545 members, first of all 272 members shall agree that yes, this judge shall be impeached. That will be the majority of the total membership. Second is majority of not less than 2/3 member present and voting. So let's say, for example, on that particular day there were around, let's say for example, 545, each one was present. So around 66% of the members shall actually agree to impeach the judge, right? So remember these two provisions which actually forms the special majority. Now there is a procedure for this, for the impeachment of High Court judge or Supreme Court judge, which is actually directed under the Judges Inquiry Act of 1968. That basically says that there shall be first of all a removal motion. So let's say, for example, if this removal motion is presented to the speaker in Lok Sabha, then how many Lok Sabha members shall agree to this removal motion? 100. But if it is presented in the Rajya Sabha to the chairman, then how many members of Rajya Sabha shall agree? 50. Now it is completely choice of speaker or the chairman to actually accept or reject this removal motion. If it is accepted, then a 3-member committee will be formed which constitutes of Chief Justice or the Judge of the Supreme Court, Chief Justice of a High Court and a distinguished jurist. Now, if this particular committee finds the judge that the judge is actually guilty, then the removal motion shall have to be passed by each of the house with the majority which we have discussed, presented to the president, and then the president can give the assent or not. The idea is, this is the removal or the impeachment of the judge. Remember that till now, no High Court judge has been impeached in our country's history. Then comes the transfer of judges. Who does the transfer? Just like the impeachment, the president has the power. The idea is that the president transfer a judge from one High Court to another in consultation with the Chief Justice of India. Keep this in mind. Then Supreme Court in 1977 ruling held that this transfer shall only be held as an exceptional measure and not as a punishment. And in 1994, it held that the judicial review doctrine shall also be applicable for the transfer of judges to actually kind of secure the arbitrary transfers which were taking place by the governments. But who can actually file this particular case or judicial review? Only the judge which is being transferred. Remember this. Then in the third judge's case 1998, it was held that when the president is going to take the opinion of CGI, CGI shall take the opinion of the 4 senior most judges of Supreme Court, then the opinion of 2 Chief Justice of High Court, 2 Chief Justice of 1 High Court from where the judge is being transferred, and from 1 High Court from where the judge is being transferred to. Thus, the sole opinion of CGI to president does not form the kind of a directive, rather a kind of a collective opinion shall be there as per the third judge's case. So remember these provisions and we move forward to the next news, where we are actually going to learn about a very interesting concept of a far-flung galaxy named Firefly Sparkle. A firefly sparkle which forms an important component of your GS3 paper under the theme of space and technology, and which has been observed by the James Webb Space Telescope. The James Webb Space Telescope, which was actually launched in December 2021, and it is orbiting around 9,30,000 miles away from the Earth at the Lagrange point 2 here. It is currently the world's biggest telescope which we have, and it mirrored at a temperature of -388 degrees Fahrenheit or -233 degrees Celsius. The cold and the telescope's distance from the Earth gives it the precision to observe red-shifted light from the early universe. Keep this in mind that this James Webb Space Telescope actually detects infrared light. So let's say, for example, there is an object which is quite old, which does not have that much of a reflection. Even then it is going to be observed by the James Webb Space Telescope in comparison to the earlier Hubble Space Telescope which we had, which actually used to observe the space in the UV light radiation and not in infrared. So with the idea of James Webb Space Telescope is to actually observe the far distant galaxies which emerged just after the event of Big Bang, which took place 13.8 billion years ago, to actually give us an insight to the early universe formation. The telescope's diameter is around 6.4 meter. So obviously it kinds of dwarfs that of Hubble Space Telescope. It had around 2.5 meter diameter. Remember that it has been kept at the Lagrangian point 2. So where obviously the gravity of Sun and the Earth kind of is going to balance this, and thus there will be less fuel consumption and less light distortion which can take place with JWST. On the other hand, Hubble Space Telescope was kept where? At lower Earth orbit. So when we have understood about the James Webb Space Telescope, let's see what it has found. So it has spotted a distant galaxy which gives us a peek at what the Milky Way, the galaxy in which our solar system exists, might have looked like in its infancy. The galaxy's name is what? The Firefly Sparkle, due to its gleaming star clusters resembling the bioluminescent bugs, which is located around 13 billion light years away. Given that the Big Bang, or the cosmic event that initiated the cosmos or the life which we see today, it occurred approximately 13.58 billion years ago, and thus the Firefly Sparkle as we observe it today is an infant galaxy formed in the immediate aftermath of the beginning of this Big Bang. Now the article suggests that it is just like the Milky Way. So this Firefly Sparkle galaxy has a mass which is equal to 10 million stars the size of our Sun, and comprises 10 densely packed star clusters which are embedded in a diffuse arc of the stars. This observation gives us a direct look at what galaxies like our Milky Way might have looked like in their infancy. At this stage, the galaxy was about 10,000 times less massive than our current Milky Way. So obviously over a period of time it is going to expand, just like how our Milky Way did. Milky Way is what? It is basically a galaxy. A galaxy which basically contains of various stars, various gases, dust particles, dark matters, all of which are bounded together by something called as gravity, discovered by Isaac Newton. So the idea is what? It includes our solar system and our planet Earth as well. And if we look at this diameter, right, this spiral galaxy, which has around 100 billion stars, one supermassive black hole, and also contains our solar system. Just look at its disk shape here, which is presented there. It has a diameter of around 26.8 plus minus 1.1 kiloparsec. So what does kiloparsec means? Kiloparsec stands for 1000 parsecs or 3262 light years. So what do we mean by light year? Light year is basically the distance which is traveled by light in the span of 1 year. So for example, the speed of light is 2.99 into 10 to the power 8 meter per second. And if the light travels with this speed in 1 year, it travels around 9.46 trillion kilometer of a distance. So multiply that by 3262. So many light years in 1 kiloparsec, then multiply it by 26.8. So that is basically the diameter of the galaxy of Milky Way in which our planet or our solar system exists. This Milky Way is actually part of a larger supercluster, that is Virgo supercluster, and this Virgo supercluster is also part of the larger supercluster which is called as Laniakea. So remember this information. Try to solve this particular question, a very interesting one. One clue has been given to you in the discussion itself. We will try to understand now what do we mean by the concept of gravitational lensing. So the idea is that the Firefly Sparkle which we are discussing, it is so small and so very far away that not even the James Webb Space Telescope would have been able to observe it. If it was not for a cosmic coincidence which takes place. What is that? So between the James Webb Space Telescope and the Firefly Sparkle, there were basically a kind of a cluster of galaxies which actually distort the space-time such that light from the far away galaxy was actually stretched and effectively amplified. And this is something which the astronomer refers to the phenomena of gravitational lensing. So for example, let's say there is a quasar, a light travels out from this quasar. Now there are these galaxies which act as a kind of a foreground. The galaxy's gravity acts as a lens which bends the quasar's diverging light path toward the Earth, and this is where we can actually observe it through our telescope, as it has been done by the James Webb Space Telescope. So remember this concept of gravitational lensing, and we move forward to the next news, where we are actually going to read about the interesting history of a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and that is the Red Fort or Lal Killa in the National Capital Territory of Delhi. So what is the history of Red Fort? Well, the Red Fort was actually commissioned by the third prominent Mughal ruler, and that was Shah Jahan, following Akbar, who ruled from 1556 to 1605, Jahangir, who ruled from 1605 to 1628, and then the Shah Jahan's reign began from 1628 and lasted till 1658. He decided to actually shift the capital from Agra to Delhi, and thus commissioned the construction of Red Fort on 12th of May 1639, and it took approximately 9 years, and the construction was completed by 1648. The chief architect of Lal Killa or Red Fort was Ustad Ahmad Lahori, who is also credited to actually create or construct the Taj Mahal, another UNESCO World Heritage Site. Remember that when we look at the Red Fort, it is the only Mughal fort which is not symmetrical in the nature, because it tries to actually contain within the fort the older Salimgarh fort as well. The older Salimgarh fort, which was actually commissioned by the Salim Shah Suri in the year of 1546. Salim Shah Suri, who was basically the son of Sher Shah Suri. Sher Shah Suri, who actually defeated Humayun and ruled from 1540 to 1555 after the fateful Battle of Chausa 1539. The only addition which was done by Aurangzeb to this structure of the Red Fort was actually the Moti Masjid, which he created. Then, in the fateful year of 1739, so after the Aurangzeb dies in 1707, there is a list of weak successive rulers, such as for example Bahadur Shah, Jahadar Shah. Then ultimately there is the rule of Muhammad Shah Rangila from 1719 to 1748, during which in the year of 1739 the Persian Emperor Nadir Shah invades India, obviously with the idea of kind of looting the various Mughal treasury and the various Mughal riches, one of which was obviously the much prized peacock throne. The peacock throne, which was created by Shah Jahan, and at that point of time actually contained the three most precious diamonds in the world, being your Kohinoor, your Roslo diamond, which is in Russia right now, and your Darya-e-Noor, which is actually in Persia right now. Then after the invasion, the Mughals' treasury was completely looted by Nadir Shah. There were further invasion by the successor of Nadir Shah, which was Ahmad Shah Abdali. So to actually prevent them from these raids, and obviously their rule has obviously now kind of limited to the area of Delhi, the Mughals actually signed a treaty of protection with Marathas in the year of 1752. Then what happens? In the year of 1760, there is almost 8 to 9 raids which were taken by the Ahmad Shah Abdali to actually further loot the regions of the prosperous regions of Punjab, Haryana and Delhi. So the Marathas actually had to melt the Diwan-e-Khas silver ceiling to actually provide the fund to fight the Ahmad Shah Abdali. And then takes place the fateful battle of the Third Battle of Panipat 1761, in which the Marathas were actually defeated by Ahmad Shah Abdali because of the treachery of Nazib-ud-Dawla, who was a Rohilla basically, and thus he was put on the throne. Then, with the help of Mahadji Sindhya, in the year of 1771, the fleeing ruler Shah Alam II, which you guys can also remember from the Battle of Buxar, which took place on 23rd of October in the year of 1764, he was actually restored to the throne of Red Fort, and thus the control of Red Fort was again brought back by the Mughals. And then weak successors kept on ruling there till the last ruler, and who was Bahadur Shah Jafar II, who unwillingly became the part of the revolt which took place in the year of 1857, where ultimately the revolters, for example Bakht Khan, was defeated by the British force, and the Bahadur Shah Jafar was actually exiled to Rangoon in the year of 1858. After which the Britishers actually got the control over the Red Fort and they tried to destroy it completely as a kind of a symbol or signia of the authority and created it as a kind of a garrison, or they used to create a prison there, and they destroyed almost 70 to 80% of the original structure. That is why the capital was kept as Calcutta till the year of 1905 by the Britishers. However, it was under the Lord Viceroy Curzon himself, who was the viceroy from 1899 to 1905, where some kind of restoration of this was actually done. Then obviously it is famous for the India's Prime Minister, who actually hoists the tricolor flag, and the Independence Day speech which takes place there. When we have understood about the history of it, obviously Red Fort marked as a kind of a zenith of architecture which actually reached under the Shah Jahan. It started from creation of, for example, Buland Darwaja by Akbar. Can any one of you tell me why Buland Darwaja was specifically created in the year of 1575? Which important event it marks? Then the use of various, let's say for example, marbles in the Mughal buildings, which started under the Noor Jahan, the creation of Itmiad ud Daula's tomb, etc. So there are various integration of all those architectural features in your Red Fort, such as for example Diwan-e-Khas, where the entire building is made up of semi-precious stones and the melted gold. It was here where the peacock throne was kept, taken by Nadir Shah, and the famous line of Amir Khusru, "If there is a paradise," is written on the arches here. Then you guys can see your Hammam-e-Athar here as well, the Rang Mahal which exists, or for example the Moti Masjid which was actually created by Aurangzeb, and the Diwan-e-Am, the back wall of the Seat of Hindustan, which has extensive Pietra Dura work which you guys can see here, as well as the use of semi-precious stone. In the center, it is the famous orifice panel which was stolen and brought back in India in 20th century. So remember these details about the Red Fort, and we move forward to the last news of the day, where the report has been published recently which actually highlights that how the Arctic is actually going to experience its first ice-free day when its water have less than 1 million square kilometer of sea ice before 2030 itself, as humans continue to emit the heat-trapping greenhouse gases. So remember, when we talk about the Arctic Ocean, it is the smallest and the shallowest ocean among the 5 oceans which we have: the Pacific, the Indian, the Atlantic. Then when it comes to the Arctic Ocean, it has the lowest salinity, obviously because of the fresh water resources which it has. 8 countries are there which actually share their boundary with the Arctic Ocean. Last year the North Sea was in the news, so they asked a question on that. The task for the day is, can you guys tell me which are the 8 countries which actually shares the boundary with the Arctic Ocean? The answer lies here in the map itself. Remember that the largest sea in the region is actually the Barents Sea, and then there are various seas within this Arctic Circle, such as for example the Laptev, the Kara, the Lincoln, the Beaufort, the Chukchi, etc. Coming to what is going to be the implication of this melting Arctic? So the article suggests that in the last 40 years, the Arctic sea ice has been melting at the rate of 12.6% each decade, a pace of decline unmatched in the last 1500 years. And that is going to have several implications. So for example, it is going to reduce the albedo effect which ice has, where they actually reflect the sunlight, so they do not trap the heat of the sunlight within the earth. But if the albedo is actually declining because of the melting of the ice, less sunlight reflection will take place. So that will obviously lead to much more trapping of heat and exacerbation of climate change. Then warming of Arctic will lead to what? It can trigger various kind of extreme weather event, such as for example weakening of the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation. So basically the cold water, it becomes dense and it comes to the warmer region of, let's say for example, equatorial, and from here the Gulf Stream, which is much more warmer and lighter water, so that moves towards the region of Arctic. So there is a kind of a temperature balance which is maintained there. But with this repeated melting of ice, obviously the temperature will increase there. So this whole AMOC is going to get disturbed as well. Then the melting of permafrost will release further stored greenhouse gases. It is obviously going to have significant impact on the flora and fauna which is found in the region, such as for example the polar bears, the Arctic foxes, the snowy owls, reindeer and walruses. And because of this, let's say for example, if the temperature is declining, so the red fox, which is found much more in the region of, let's say for example, towards the upper tropical regions, they can also migrate to that region because the temperature is becoming much more habitual for them. So that can actually lead to not only only the crunch of resources, but it can also lead to further human-animal conflicts as well. So remember these implications of Arctic ice. And with this, we have reached to the end of our discussion today. Do not forget to attempt the questions at the end of the video and test your knowledge. We will meet in a very interesting discussion very soon. Till then, all the very best for your preparation and thank you.